Our federal government, our legislative branch of government, has about 17 powers that are enumerated to them. They are defined and numbered. They can do this. That's it. Article 1, Section 8. That's their powers. Article 2, Section 2. Here's another idea. You want to talk about state sovereignty? Perfect example right here. Article 2, Section 2 brings out how it is we execute treaties. The executive branch of government writes up the treaties, but you know, our congressmen in Washington, D.C. have absolutely nothing to do with it. But you know who does? Senators. You know why? Because if the federal government's going to compromise our sovereignty, then the states ought to have representation to decide whether or not we wish to compromise our sovereignty, because we are sovereign states. Article 4, Section 4 guarantees to every state a Republican form of government. In other words, rule of law. And then the 10th Amendment. As Catherine pointed out earlier, all powers not given to the federal government belong to the people. I'm going to paraphrase for you the 10th Amendment. What the people are saying to the government in the 10th Amendment is saying, hey, all the powers we forgot to give you, and all the powers that we forgot to tell you that you don't have, well, just to be on the safe side, you can't do any of that either. That's for the states. Patrick Henry said the Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government, lest it come to dominate our lives. Does anybody here think that we have a federal government that's become an overwhelmingly strong central government? I'll give you the short list. In the last 100 years, here's some new taxes. Last 100 years. Cigarette tax, federal income tax, federal unemployment tax, inheritance tax, IRS interest charges. In other words, penalties for not paying your income tax. That way they can tax your taxes. Luxury tax. That's where they sit around and decide how wealthy you have to be before they decide to tax you more. Medicare, telephone federal excise tax, and sin tax. That's the one where they take upon themselves the oligarchy elitist mentality to say, hey, we don't like that you're buying these things. We think it's bad. So we're going to try to tax it out of existence.
Sugar tax.
I'm giving you the short list. And just this year alone, our federal government has nationalized a large part of our banking industry. They've nationalized a large part of the transportation industry, either through outright ownership or through extensive regulation. Out of control spending. You know, Thomas Jefferson, he once said that every generation ought to be able to pay for their own debts. He said that's the moral thing to do, and I believe him. Now they're attempting to gain even more power. Hate crimes legislation. The American people have been asleep on this one while we've been too preoccupied with health control. If they get through this hate crimes legislation, you want to talk about an elitist mentality. Now they're going to have the ability to judge and punish you on the perceived motivations or your lack of sensitivity on crimes, and they're new crimes. Your thoughts, your motivations are the new crimes. They've broken that bond. They've broken that trust that we give them when we elect them. James Madison said this. James Madison said there are more instances of the abridgments of people's liberty by the government through silent encroachments on their freedom than by sudden and violent usurpations. Where's the news media when they're trying to judge our thoughts? What makes them think, and what makes them or anybody else think that sooner or later their thoughts are not going to be a crime?
They already are.
There's a story that goes about some Allied troops that helped liberate a concentration camp, and they found a Protestant preacher, and he didn't fit the profile of most of the people that were there, and they said, how'd you get here? He said, well, they came for the Jews, and I didn't object because I wasn't a Jew. They came for this group and that group and this group, and I didn't object because I wasn't one of them. He said, then they came for me and there was nobody left to object. The Constitution of the United States, listen people, we have our freedom not because we have a Republican and Democrat party. We have our freedom because we have the United States Constitution. The platforms of the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, you name it. Their whole goal, their only effort, the reason they come out and talk to people is because they have an effort to stay in power. That's what they're trying to do. The Democrats will take the Constitution and stretch it to the left and choke you out of your liberty. The Republicans, in order to combat that, they're going to stretch it to the right to choke you out of your liberty. The Constitution is not made to stretch. That's why the powers are enumerated. That way we can govern ourselves. I think one of the first things we need to do in order to get a handle on our elected leaders and help spread the word across the American people, to help enlighten them, help rally and recall them to the Constitution, as Thomas Jefferson once said, is we need to call this country what it is, a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. Here's what Benjamin Franklin said about democracy. He said democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. And it's kind of funny, however, that's what we're turning it into. Because the words that we're using, if they can play that game, so can we. Don't call it health care, call it health control.